Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Please be sure, download the app, share it with your friends and family. You'll have access to all of our station's content, not just the front line with Joe and Joe. And Joe and I go live generally Thursday nights, 9 o'clock. Eastern time on social media, X, Rumble, Facebook, YouTube. We're across all platforms. So wherever you see us, all these interviews that we do for Veritas, the radio station is gracious enough to let us put these on our social media site. So if you like the content, if you like what you hear, if you like what you see, help us out to get to a wider audience. Like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Today's conversation, everybody knows Joe and Joe. This is right up our alley. These are the things that we feel are the most amongst the most important things to be talking about, particularly in America. So today we have Dr. Nathanael Blake on the show, and we're going to be discussing his new book out from Ignatius Press, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. Joe, I think that qualifies for going in the breach. What do you think?
It doesn't get any more deep than this.
That's what I'm saying. And if you want to, and we're going to get into it in the conversation with Dr. Blake, this is one of the roots of all our problems, is the sexual revolution in the 1960s. So we're going to get into it all. Nathanael Blake is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. He's a regular columnist for The Federalist, World Opinions, and other popular publications. He received his doctorate from the Catholic University of America and currently lives in Virginia with his wife and children. Dr. Nathanael Blake, welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe, our brother.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, we really appreciate it. Like I said, these conversations like this, Dr. Blake. These are the reasons why Joe and I started doing this show a few years ago. That these are the things that need to be confronted. So we're very excited about this conversation. We are going to learn a lot. I'm sure our audience is going to learn a lot. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Joe Resinello.
Dr. Blake, we always begin with a prayer to Our Lady in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, O Virgin of Virgins, our Mother. To you we come, for you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Well, as Joe said, this is a very important topic. I've recently had a conversation with somebody about this, and I basically made this comment. And I want to begin, even before I get your definition of what the sexual revolution is, but this is what I said to them. The sexual revolution in America has done more harm than a nuclear bomb could have done, in my opinion, as far as destroying families, as far as leading people astray, as far as people losing meaning in their life and significance, redirecting the direction of this country away from God and away from basically understanding who we are as a people, all because of the sexual revolution. And it has done a tremendous amount of harm, and America continues to buy into it, hook, line, and sinker. What are your comments just on that? Because that is how I view it. I look at my friends, I look at people in my family. Some of these people are the smartest people in the room, yet they don't get it, and they don't want to get it. It's full steam ahead. They've destroyed their marriages, they've destroyed children, and it's all like lights are green. I don't know if we can get the toothpaste back in the tube. That's what we're going to talk about today. But what are your comments on those thoughts?
Well, I think that the very reason I gave my book the title I did, Victims of the Revolution, is because in a culture that loves to talk about victimhood and who's the victims, who's the victimizer, we don't talk about the people who are hurt by our sexual culture. That's the one thing. We'll talk about economic victims, we'll talk about educational victims, but we don't talk about those who get hurt by what we do in the bedroom. But it is incredibly damaging when that goes off the rails, because that is central to family life. It is central to how we bring new people into this world. It is central to relationships. So these are essential matters, and they have the potential to be incredibly wonderful in those vocations of marriage and family most of us are called to in this life, but they can also be incredibly damaging when they go wrong, and they've gone very wrong in our culture.
I think that's just To me, it's just easy to demonstrate. If you are sincerely seeking the truth about, let's say, for example, the sexual liberation the sexual revolution. To me, if you're not seeing it, you have your eyes closed. Willfully or woefully, it is up to you. But you have your eye. You're blind to what's going on. I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of it when you talk about what again, the title of your book, Victims of the Revolution, the children of divorce, the couples that have been divorced. People think that like divorce is like nothing. But anyway, we'll get into that in a little bit. Dr. Nathanael Blake joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. Now, I will post a link to Ignatius in the description, so you can click on there, go buy the book. And of course, Father Fessio will get very mad at me if I don't remind everybody to go tell your local Catholic bookstore at your parish or wherever to go order a few copies and put it on the shelf. I promise you, the copies of those books are not going to stay there too long. So as to what Joe was saying earlier, Dr. Blake, let's break it down. Let's give our audience and Joe and myself a definition of what are we talking about. We're talking about the sexual revolution.
Sure. So I think there's three things that are all closely tied together. There's the sexual revolution, sexual liberation, and sexual liberalism. And the way I define those is the sexual revolution was the movement, the cultural revolution, the upending of norms on behalf of an ideology of sexual liberation that then established a regime of sexual liberalism. And what they all worked together to establish, and what their premise was the belief that we would be freer, we would be authentic, we would be happier, and we would have a lot of great sex if we just got rid of all the old norms, the old restrictions, the old rules around sexual activity, the obligations of marriage, and that human flourishing would be the result of ditching all of that. And of course, it has not happened. Americans are lonelier. Americans are even having less sex. We just had the Wall Street Journal reporting on the 2024 General Social Survey data, one of the best sources of data for things like this. And guess what? Americans are reporting less sex. Why? Well, in large part because Americans are less likely to be married than ever before. And it turns out marriage, far from being a killjoy that destroys sexual happiness, actually tends to be good for it. Because you know what? You need a partner. It's very simple, very obvious, but the endless cycling from relationship to relationship, bed to bed, leaves people without even what they were promised. And of course, it does tremendous damage to them spiritually as well as in other ways.
Dr. Blake, Joe, if you don't mind, I want to stay there for a second, okay, just to get into the little history. I don't want to sound like, I'm not trying to sound like a woe is me Catholic, okay? But let's be clear. And again, you can tell me if you agree or not, all right? The Protestants gave up on this fight going back to the 1930s at the Lambeth Conference when they decided to ditch their teaching on contraception. When you talk about old norms, I read that as Catholic teaching on sexual morality. That's what I read that as. And when you look at, let's say, for argument's sake, Griswold coming on the heels of the 1950s, which I think you could argue the 30s, 40s, and 50s were very strong for Catholicism in America, okay? And that needed to be rebelled against. So I think that the Protestants, again, I'm not beating them up. They had already caved on contraception. The church never did. The church was expected to. Paul VI said no in Humanae Vitae, okay? Isn't this a rebellion against Catholic Catholic teaching on sexual ethics and morality?
Okay, well, that's a bit of a fun one. Because
I like having fun.
Well, no, because I know this is mentioned somewhere in the materials, but I'm actually Presbyterian, despite writing for a Catholic press. However, I do agree largely that Protestants, and I say this in the book, did not think through these issues, and that there was a real abandonment. And I quoted another colleague of mine, who I think is Anglican, saying that Protestants need to work to develop or adopt a theology of the body-like ethos. So, yes, unfortunately, I think a lot of my fellow Protestants don't have a very well-developed idea of human sexuality. But if I could turn that around, I would also say Catholics, well, they've preserved a very rich intellectual tradition, have really failed at bringing that into the pews, into the parishes, because it's something like 90% of Catholics, or some horrible number, disagree on church teaching on birth control, and an enormous number also disagree on things like abortion. So I think it's all of the above. We're all guilty across
I'm
denominations.
glad
But
you brought
Wait,
that
great,
up.
wait, Joe, real quick. I'm sorry, Joe. Would you attribute that, Dr. Blake? Let's say when you, and you're rightfully, mentioning, let's say the Catholic, many individual Catholics who don't adhere to church teaching on these things. Would you say that that is one of the bad fruits of the sexual revolution? Is that that mindset seeped into, let's say, the Catholic Church and the Catholics in the pews?
I mean, I think for a really good historical account, you'd probably want to look to someone like Mary Eberstadt, because the precise cause and effect of how that played out, I'm not sure. But I certainly know that there was a concomitant thing where there was an expectation that the church would change its teaching. A lot of Catholics gave up on that teaching in practice. And then, even though the church reaffirmed its teachings, they continued to down that path. So the precise cause and effect, I'm not going to be able to unpack historically, and I'll just admit that.
No, no, and thank you for that, Joe Rossinello.
You're 100% correct on that. I mean, let's be honest. You get married at 26 and you have one kid outside of a medical issue. And that happens. I don't want to mind somebody's problem. That's impossible. It's impossible. I'm just being honest. I've been married 12 years. I have 5 children and we lost 3. I'm speaking from experience. That is impossible. So the church clearly has failed in its messaging. And it's not just the prelate's fault. I don't want to it's the families in the pew. We are not practicing what we preach. Some may know it, some just disregard it. It's completely irrelevant. And ultimately, and I have said this on the show publicly, then our marriages aren't sacramental. It is a promise we make at the altar that we will be open to life and we are fruitful. And that means we're cutting our marriage off from grace. And when we cut our marriages off from grace, we open ourselves up to problems. And that is a driving reason why there are divorces, because we don't have grace in our marriages. And that is, I'll be honest with you, we have to start diagnosing problems. It's not just okay. And too many people just move on and accept the norm as if it's good, or frankly, you can't do anything about it, or it's unrealistic. That's on the family level. But on the clergy's level, when was the last time, and you're not Catholic, but I am, and I could say this, I have never heard a homily on contraception, ever. I'm 55 years old. I went to Catholic school. I went to Catholic college. I went to a Catholic graduate school. I have never heard that. Meanwhile, one kid, married at 23. How's that possible? How's that possible? I'm interested in your thoughts as a non-Catholic. That's my thoughts as a Catholic. And it's a root cause of why our marriages are falling apart.
So I will mention my wife is Catholic. So yeah, we made those promises to be open to life. And we have been one of those couples that only had 2 kids so far. And just for whatever reason, God did not give us children for a long time. And it happens. But we also know that you do the math, and it's not everyone having that.
That's right.
But I will say, yeah, so I go to mass nearly every week with my wife, and I have certainly never heard an entire homily on contraception, and I might have heard it mentioned once or twice, which I think is more than most priests would even bring it up. But you're right, it is ignored. And then speaking on the Protestant side, I've almost never heard Protestants mention it as even an area of concern. And these are preachers who otherwise are very conservative, who are very sound in reaffirming biblical sexual ethics, but it has simply been accepted as part of the cultural norm.
Dr. Nathaniel Blake is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. So please go out and buy his book, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. That's available at Ignatius Press. I'll post a link in the description. Please go ask your local bookstore to stock a few copies on the shelf. So let's get back into, let's say, the battle, if you will. All regimes that are at war have propaganda, and even not even necessarily when you're even at war. But when you talk about a revolution, you think like in terms of battles and all that kind of stuff. So the sexual revolution has a propaganda arm. They have to sell it. Okay, so talk about that a little bit, because you say that you mentioned that in the book.
Yeah, so we've got Hollywood, we've got the music industry, and the overriding theme for decades now has been that sex is something to just be enjoyed whenever you can, and settling down is something you do late after you've had all of the fun you possibly can. And that this is wonderful. And of course, what we see is people who are hurt by this. And in fact, the same people who are pushing this often are being hurt by it, right? Who would have thought that Paris Hilton, who in the early aughts or whatever we're calling them, was sort of the poster child of mindless, brainless bimboism, and I think she might be a little smarter than she let on, but whatever. She came out a few years back and said, actually, I spent my 20s viewing sex as a chore. I didn't enjoy it at all. But she was selling this thing. And we see that pattern over and over again. We see Britney Spears a few years ago talking about the abortion she had with her pop star boyfriend, and they were both rich. This was not, oh, we can't afford to have a child. It was just he didn't want that responsibility. He was a young male pop star who wanted to spend his life sleeping around, and they broke up and all that. But she was really hurt by that, but she didn't say anything about that for decades. Although the fact that she's had so many public mental problems since then does suggest that it really hurt her. So just example after example of the people selling us this lifestyle of sexual liberation is awesome are often being hurt by it privately, but they don't say that at the time.
Dr. Blake, I've read this, and I also, have a little bit of personal experience in just conversations with people, friends, and things like that. I want to stay on that for a second. The singer who calls herself Madonna, okay? I think she was a put-up job. I've always said she was never a very good singer. She's never a very good dancer. She was there for one reason. She was there to wreck the faith and morals, particularly the morals, sexual morals of young Catholic girls. Again, that's in the conversation for another day. I believe that about her. I think that's why she was there, all right? Why she was promoted. But they promote this. She is always promoted, aside from her blasphemy, she's always promoted what you're writing about in your book, the sexual revolution, you got to be free, all that stuff, okay? But I've heard and I've read, all right, that there are countless women who thought that that was the way to go. And they're wrecked. I know some personally, and I've seen different people online talking about these things. They're wrecked because they followed that lifestyle. Because when you have no control over your passions, and I guess this is where I'm going, if your reason doesn't control your passion, and that's promoted, and that's the way you live, well, then that's going to bleed into other areas of your life. That's going to bleed into the way you spend money and your impulse buying, perhaps drugs. It's not just sex in and of itself is my point. This is where I'd like your comment. You start to develop really bad habits that lead to other bad habits. But it started with freeing yourself sexually. What are your thoughts on that? And even if you agree with me.
Well, I think there's certainly an element of that insofar as vice, sin, always grows. Just like virtue, when we are trying to follow God, we'll continue to find new areas in our life where we can become more virtuous, where we can grow in our sanctification. So too sin, when we are indulging ourselves, rebelling against God's commandments, that will continue to seep into new areas of our life. We thought it was just sex. I mean, I talk about John the Baptist a bit in the book, but let's also talk about King Herod. King Herod thought he was just enjoying a salacious dance. And then he makes a promise. And suddenly he finds himself having to execute John the Baptist, which he didn't want to do. but he was led by his sin from something that he was enjoying that was fun to doing something that he didn't want to do that was incredibly evil and that he knew was wrong, but he felt trapped by his very prior sins.
Dr. Nathaniel Blake's joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Please go out and buy the book, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. Thanks for that, Dr. Blake. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go?
I just want to air out, in case somebody who's listening doesn't understand why the church teaches about contraception. When we contracept, we say to our spouse, I only love you to a point. You're not giving yourself completely to your spouse. And in doing so, that will bleed into other aspects of your marriage. In essence, you're using each other as opposed to giving to each other, because love gives, it doesn't take. And that is why the church teaches that. A lot of people can't articulate it or don't articulate it, and that's where trouble happens, because you mentioned something earlier. It bleeds into other things. The contraceptive mentality leads to abortion. In Humani Vitae, the famous document by Paul VI, he warned society about this. He said that this type of behavior will lead to men disrespecting women, have no respect for women. We see this today. A haphazard approach to sex. And this is something interesting, because you're an academic and I went to school, I was away at school. Parents almost look at this broken dance between men and women. We don't know how to date anymore. We don't know how to interact anymore, and they accept it. Like, oh, my daughter's going off to college. Make sure you take the pill. My son is going off to college. Oh, he's just sowing his wild oats. As if these things have no consequences. This is, you talk about the propaganda arm from a broader perspective. That's on the micro level. People go away to school, and that is in the mind of parents, as if like this is perfectly normal. And then they wonder why their children don't have successful marriages. They come back wounded. They come back in all types, whether it's an abortion, whether it's date rape, or a number of problems that take place on college campuses because of this cavalier attitude. And everyone's just okay with it. And I say they're okay with it because they don't speak out against it. When you're not speaking out against it, it's de facto basically saying you're okay with it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and I would actually add another point, which is that even Christian parents and Christian churches that are trying to hold the line on these things, fornication, still tend to not think through their positions. For instance, the number of Christian parents who accept a cultural norm of very late marriage is far too high. And the reason is because if you accept that your children won't get married till they're 30 necessarily, and that's normal, you're making it far harder for them to live a life of chastity. And if you're more concerned about the start of their career than the start of their marriage and family, you're making it far harder for them to find that vocation of marriage and again live that life of chastity. So it's both the parents that simply accept a hookup culture for their children, and it's even the ones who would reject that but then don't provide a reasonable alternative. And then with regard to that connection between contraception, abortion, and treating women badly, we see that very manifest in the way that the sexual revolution treats women as defective men, right? Because the problem with women from the sexual revolution's perspective is that they are fertile and that human reproduction is asymmetric. The burdens of having a baby fall more on women than on men. That's simply how biology works. Now, there are also benefits and blessings for women in that. But if your ideal is absolute autonomy, absolute liberation, freedom from obligation, freedom from anyone being dependent on you, then you're going to have a problem with women because something seems wrong with them by the very reality of they carry humans in them for 9 months. Whereas, of course, Christians will say, well, actually, this is an opportunity for solidarity, for love to be manifest, and we care for each other's burdens. We don't reject the vulnerable and dependent. But if you simply want freedom above all else, especially sexual freedom, then you have to denigrate women by the very reality of their biology.
That's one of the things, Dr. Blake, and we're going to take a break in a couple of minutes. That's one of the things that I felt shocked about a few years ago. You probably know the book, I forgot the author, The Hookup Culture, where the woman who was a feminist, I forgot her name, I apologize, she was promoting the hookup culture to women. My larger point is, and everybody on this show knows, I lived 20 years of my life. Kickstarted in college, by the way, a Catholic college. All right, I started my sexually liberated journey in life for 20 years, not practicing the Catholic faith. Here's my larger point: I did not respect any women. I'm not going to lie about that. Okay, my mother, I did, of course. All right, but as far as going out and meeting women and stuff, I had never even the thought of getting married or anything like that, or having any real respect for any of the women, let's say, when I was living that party lifestyle. Now, I admit that, and I admit that it's wrong. But then a book like The Hookup Culture comes out, I guess it's about 20 years ago now or so, all right, that actually promotes it. And somebody wants to grab the women by the lapels and say, don't you understand, if you live this way, men don't respect you, and you cannot command their respect. You can't force them to respect you. Am I wrong in that, Dr. Blake?
No, you're right. Men will use women, right? We are sinful creatures, all of us, but men in particular, if encouraged to be selfish, are going to be selfish, and their selfishness is going to hurt women. I mean, one of the things that was shocking to me a little bit was just how many sources I was finding, like the New York Times, like the Atlantic, that are certainly not conservative Christian by any stretch of the imagination, nonetheless writing about the problems of our hookup culture, and in particular, how violent it has become, especially under the influence of pornography. It is incredible to me just how things like sexual strangulation have become normalized and part of the dating and hookup culture that are not only degrading to women, but physically damaging and dangerous. And yet we're just supposed to accept this. The sexual revolutionaries still tell us this is fine. It's just people exploring their kinky side or whatever. No, this is men physically abusing women. There's nothing good about that. But ultimately, if you have no constraints, if you have no normative idea of how humans are supposed to live, you're going to accept even obviously evil things like that.
Absolutely. We're going to take a break just for a minute, and then we're going to come back at the front line with Joe and Joe. This is a great conversation with Dr. Nathanael Blake. The book he's written is Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. Now, you can buy it from Ignatius, which I'll post a link in the description. You could buy it or ask your Catholic bookstore or any local bookstore to put some copies on the shelves. But Dr. Blake, where else can our audience members buy the book?
They can also find it on Amazon if that is more convenient for them.
Yeah, I've softened on that a little bit. So I used to say, never buy it from Amazon, always buy it from the publisher. If you have to, you have to. Go buy it from Amazon. The most important thing is read the book. So stick around here at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial. We have another great segment with Dr. Nathanael Blake. We will be right back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. We are way in the breach with Dr. Nathanael Blake, and we're discussing his new book, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. Of course, you can buy it from Amazon. It is available there. We would encourage you to click the link in the description to Ignatius Press. Go buy it from the publisher, and also ask your local bookstore to stock a few copies on the shelves. So with that, Joe Resinello, I'm going to hand it over to you. Where do you want to start?
Let's talk about the LGBTQ lobby and that revolution, which is basically a part of the sexual revolution. I was born in 1970, and I've seen that arc whereby, say, when I was in college from 88 to 92, this type of behavior was definitely not in the open. I'm sure it went on, but it was not in the open. Now it's on Main Street. I'll give credit where credit's due. I have never seen a lobby be so successful in my lifetime. The Catholic Church should take note. We should study how they did it, because it's amazing how they have normalized something, and this affects both Protestants and Catholics, because the behavior is an intrinsic evil. Let me say that again. It is an intrinsic evil, and our society accepts it just like we accept putting ketchup on a hot dog. It's completely normalized. This is a mortal sin. This is not my opinion. That's due to their lobby. Phenomenal. Talk about that, because it's impacted the whole country. It's embraced by Catholics and Protestants alike, and it is a mortal sin, grave in nature.
Yeah, so I'm going to make two quick points on this. The first one is that they were successful in large part because of the prior portions of the sexual revolution. So when you've got that separation of sexuality from permanence, that separation of sexuality from procreation, then you will naturally start to erode the foundations by which you would say that homosexual activity is wrong. Because I don't think I quoted in the book, but Andrew Sullivan, one of those main proponents of same-sex marriage, had a piece, I believe it was in the New Republic, titled something like "We Are All Sodomites Now." And his point was that even the many, many people in our nation who are not homosexual, the vast majority, still think of sexuality in ways that are similar to those of the homosexual community, or whatever we want to call them. And that's true to a large extent, is if you view sexuality, even in a Christian marriage, as primarily about sexual pleasure, not about that union of procreation and the love of husband and wife, if you view marriage as something that is optional, that can be dissolved at will, you've already gone a great way towards embracing ideas that will normalize and approve of homosexuality. The second point I would make is that the homosexual lobby, or the LGBT lobby, whatever we want to call them, were very good at spreading a lie that people believed and that was very effective, and that was "Born This Way." There's even a Lady Gaga song about it 10 years ago or so. But the idea is that your sexual identity, your sexual desires, are completely intrinsic, they are innate, they are immutable. And that, one, it's not true. The search for a gay gene, so called, ended in failure a few years back. It was reported, but not trumpeted loudly because they didn't want to make a big deal about that. But there is no gay gene. The second point is that that view nonetheless meant that they were going to come after children, right? Andrew Sullivan, I just mentioned him. He had a piece in the New York Times a few months ago now, I think, saying the LGBT lobby should have left the kids alone. But the very logic of Born This Way means you can't leave the kids alone, right? If you say that, well, this is an intrinsic, innate, unchangeable part of identity, then of course you have to teach the children about it. You have to make sure that they are drawn out on these issues. You have to make sure that their families are affirming. That is the inevitable logic of Born This Way. And that is part of why they were so successful at reaching into the school system, at reaching into the, it's in the, every library, every school. You can't avoid it.
We mentioned earlier Dr. Nathaniel Blake's joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. I think I alluded to it earlier where it's funny. I've been reading Dante lately. I haven't read Dante in years. My wife has to read it for because she's a teacher at the charter school here. So part of their training is they have to read it anyway. And so I was on the I believe it was the first circle where the shades are being thrown around and whipped around by the wind because those were the people that couldn't control their passions. So they would just follow their passions wherever it goes. How much of that is at play here? Because the reason why let me see if I can phrase it a little bit better. I know I'm a little muddled. I'm sorry, Dr. Blake. I think there's a movement in the world. Okay, I don't think it's conspiratorial to say that there are those who, in their zeal to control people, convince people that they're actually free, and that's part of the sexual revolution. Is that you're convincing people you're actually free, But in the meantime, you're not, and that's why I mentioned Dante, because when you allow your passions to control your reason, what you are is a slave. See, if you're a slave to Jesus Christ, you are truly free. That's the paradox. And if you're sexually free, you're really a slave, or you're allowing others to enslave you, or you're enslaving yourself to your passions. I think you know where I'm going with that. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And how much of what I just said pertains to what you've written in your book?
So I talk about this in the book. Lay out three different views of sexual liberation, what that could mean. So we have our current view of sexual liberation that the culture proclaims to us, which is that you are freest when you do what you want, when you are able to indulge your passions, your desires. That is who you really are, and that is freedom. But then we could contrast that with an ancient pagan perspective. In particular, I'm thinking of Plato and some of his followers, who would emphasize no, this is slavery. To be ruled by your desire, as you say, to allow your reason to be controlled by your desire, is in fact a form of bondage, of slavery. It's allowing the highest part of yourself, your rational capabilities, to be governed by the lowest, most animalistic portion of yourself. And I think as Christians, we would say, yes, that is, you're onto something. But then you talked about, finally, and alluded to the Christian perspective, which is that true freedom is found in servitude to God, because that is fulfilling our nature of what we were made to. And this goes beyond the pagan perspective, which says, rationally control your desires, rationally control your appetites. Instead, it says, yes, that's good, but it's not just something that you can do on your own. You need God's grace. You need the divine process of sanctification in your life, making you holier, making you more like Christ, so that you're not just controlling your desires, you're changing your desires. Your entire person is becoming united with Christ. You're putting to death the old sinful self, buried with Christ, raised with him in baptism. You just start quoting Pauline epistle after Pauline epistle here, but just that emphasis on the changing of the self, and that's our true freedom, is when we become who God meant us to be, and that is achieved for us through Jesus Christ, and we cooperate with him in that process of sanctification. That's the Christian view of sexual liberation. And incidentally, what that does in this life is it allows sexuality to be what it was meant to be, to have that deep union of husband and wife, which, again, it's a symbol of Christ in the church, and it's a beautiful, wonderful, self-giving, self-sacrificial love that is far deeper, far more meaningful, and often far more pleasurable than just another drunken campus hookup.
Joe, let me stay there if you don't mind, just for 1 second, okay? I just want to follow up on that because you mentioned the word sacrifice, and again, I've lived both, so I actually know from whence I speak. All right, is that getting married is something that I didn't have in my head after 20 years of being, let's use the word sexually liberated, okay? The party lifestyle, the hookup culture, all right? But by God's grace, okay, let me first and foremost say it was God's gift to me to pull me out of the mud. However, when I got married, and mentally, I still wasn't mature enough at 38 years old, okay, to think about, okay, should I get married? Okay, I didn't think I was fully prepared, but you want to know something? Finding the right woman, I'm speaking from a man's point of view, of course, and getting married, well, guess what it does? It actually imposes on you to have to put those things down, because you start to realize, whether you like it or not, your life now is about somebody else. And then when the kids come along, your life is about other people. Now it's your wife, it's your children, all right? And guess what you do? If your reason is controlling everything else, that's the way you start living your life. And that's a beautiful thing. So now I have 12 years, 13, 14 years past from that former life of mine, realizing, okay, I'm still selfish. I'm a guy, all right? I want to watch the Jets on Sunday, even though that's painful. But the point is, but when I wake up every day, my focus is on my wife and my son. Marriage does that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so there are elements. Here's a good analogy. Marriage is like learning to play an instrument. Let's say guitar. Now you can just noodle around endlessly on guitar, and you don't actually get anywhere, or whatever instrument you want to play. Marriage is like marriage forces you to take lessons or go through your scales, work through your chord progressions and all of that. It's harder. It is more work, but it is also more fulfilling. It produces something more beautiful. So any artistic or human endeavor is like that usually, where what's really worth having does require some work, does require some sacrifice, but you even start to enjoy that. You start to enjoy the work you put in on your family in marriage. You start to enjoy the work you put in learning an instrument or getting better at a sport, whatever it is. And that's one way of looking at it. But yes, we find ultimately, and this is where marriage goes well beyond just, playing guitar or something. We find our fulfillment in human beings and relationship. We're meant for relationship. We're meant to be fulfilled by love for others and from others. And marriage is one of the primary ways most of us are called to experience that in this life. And it is a joy that is beyond anything else, I find. I mean, simply having my daughter come up when I'm having my coffee in the morning and just want to sit with me and maybe look at pictures on the phone of the family. That is something beautiful. And it sounds small. It doesn't sound nearly as much fun as a party lifestyle, but it's better. Just that love of a child for her father and my love for her. And just example after example of these small things, and then of course the big things, but where it is so much more fulfilling. It is because it's ultimately rooted in love. And that love is a reflection ultimately of God's love for his own children, for us, a love that was made manifest in the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, becoming incarnate, dying for our sake. So we
You know,
see all these things come together, love and sacrifice and our ultimate fulfillment. And marriage is such a beautiful picture, marriage and family life, of these spiritual truths.
Dr. Blake, I'm going to hand it over to Joe Rossinello, but I'll tell you this. If there's one thing that the sexual liberationists or revolutionaries or whatever you want to call them, one word they can't use is the word that you just used, love. You could describe it in anything you want, pleasure, whatever the case may be, but please don't insult us by telling us that what you're engaging is in actual love, because it is the opposite. Anyway, Joe Rossinello.
I want to talk about basically America as it is right now, based upon what you just said. You mentioned the word sacrifice. Do we even know what that means anymore? I mean, when I was a child, on my little block, I watched families deep sacrifices for their kids. People stayed married, even people who weren't religious. Do we even understand what that means anymore? And why should we be shocked when marriage doesn't work in 55% of the situations outside of the reality of grace? Because I'm a firm believer that we need grace because we are fallen creatures. All of us are sinners. We need God's grace. That's why marriage is a sacrament. However, to have a successful marriage, one must sacrifice. America is everything but that. Are we even capable at this point in time? And do we even know what it is? Everyone's getting married on beaches, looking at the ocean, I mean, goodness gracious. The party continues on until it ends, and it does end. And this is where we're at in America now. Your thoughts?
Well, I think we can't fully extirpate the natural law from ourselves. So we still have glimpses of it. I think one of the places where our culture has an understanding of sacrifice is athletic endeavors. You watch sports. You mentioned the Jets. I'm sorry for
It's okay.
that, but the commercials constantly emphasize work hard, sacrifice, work hard for whatever your goal is in whichever sport you are, and do this with the aid of Gatorade or Nike or whatever they're selling you. But so we do understand in some contexts the importance of sacrifice. But yes, we've very much lost it in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to family. Our culture will say nothing's more important than family, and we totally do not live that way. Our laws are not written that way. Our culture doesn't preach that message. So we have the understanding of sacrifice, but we need to bring it back into the family. And I actually believe this is where Christians have an opportunity, because the sexual revolution really has been failing. It's become more and more apparent that, in our baptismal vows, if you've been to a baptism lately, you've heard, do you reject Satan and his empty promises? Well, empty is in there for a reason, because the devil does not give you what he says he will. And the sexual revolution made a lot of promises it is not delivered. And Christians have an opportunity now to speak to a culture that is hurting. And I think we can make this case in ways that maybe we couldn't 20 years ago, where it was still just a given that the party lifestyle was great and fulfilling and awesome, and no one would question that. I think people are starting to question it. I think there's been enough carnage. People are looking for something better. And I think that we can say, yeah, there's a better vision. There's a better way to live. It is rooted in the truth about human nature. And that's one of the things that Christianity teaches. The sexual rules that Christianity includes as part of its moral law are there for a reason. They're not idiosyncratic religious observances. It is instead there for our good, because these are meant to fulfill us, to bring us into right relation with others. And consequently, yes, following them is good for us, it's good for society. And
Let
I
me
think,
jump in on there because
yeah,
you're so right. And I say this, I've taught the Catholic faith for many, many years. The natural law applies to you whether you recognize it or not. It's like gravity. You don't believe in gravity? Jump off the roof. And then when you crash to the cement and you're mangled, I'll ask you again. Do you believe in gravity? You don't? Do it again. And that is exactly what we do. We go to relationship to relationship to relationship. Wash, rinse, repeat. Thinking somehow this time it's going to work. When in fact we are going against the natural law. And when we do, something breaks within us. It's in you. However you identify, whatever your pronouns are, which is a conversation we could talk about for another day and a year and a week. I mean, forever. It's insanity. And to your point, I do believe some people are opening their eyes to it because it's been a failure. It doesn't work. The definition of madness is to repeat the same thing over and over again and think you're going to have a different outcome. The outcome is the same. I know I'm crazy. I'm from New Jersey. That's how we roll. But I'm interested in your thoughts. But that's my observation. And I have eyes.
yeah. Well, and one of the reasons why in my book I relied a lot on sources, the New Yorker, the New York Times, the Atlantic, why I relied so much on those is to help make this point from places that are very much not Catholic, not Protestant, not socially conservative in any way. But you still have writers acknowledging there's a problem. A Democratic appointed Surgeon General takes to the New York Times to say America has a loneliness epidemic. A feminist writer admits this sex positive porn culture is hurting women. And just again, the Wall Street Journal, just the other week, there's a, or at least from when we're recording this, there's a sex recession. And that's something that just keeps happening. And why? Well, because when people are not committed, it's self destructive, even to pleasure seeking. Selfishness is self defeating. You want to connect with someone sexually, well, if you try to separate that from all the other ways you're meant to connect with them through a committed lifelong relationship, you're going to end up simply destroying relationships and leave yourself, in most cases, lonelier and less sexually satisfied. And that's what we're seeing with people.
It's so horrible. I mentioned earlier about stories I've heard and people I've known. You used the word carnage, Dr. Blake. It's exactly what it is. And aside from praying for a lot of people, that they don't go down this road or they somehow can emerge from this lifestyle. It's just sad to watch because I would say if I was on any of these multi-million viewer podcast where they have all the what is the OnlyFans girls there, and they're trying to get their. I say, do you understand the concept of aging? Do you understand the concept that you're not going to be, whether you think so or not, you're not going to be desirable in 20 years? Okay? And then you're gonna look back. It's like Sir Alec Guinness at the end of Bridge on the River Kwai when he realizes that he made a mistake, and he goes, "Oh my God, what have I done?" All right, and that's what they're gonna do. And my heart goes out to them, because guys like you in writing this book, and others out there who are giving voice to this problem, are trying to tell, particularly young women. Young men are another story. We got to teach them some damn discipline. But tell these women, as you've mentioned throughout this conversation, you're going to get hurt. You're being used. This leads nowhere. It bears nothing but bad fruit. Why don't you wake up now that you're 20 rather than wait until you're 45? And there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it then. What are your thoughts, Doc?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, another thing earlier this summer, so again, didn't make it into the book, but a woman took to the New York Times to complain at length about how men don't find her desirable anymore. Well, she and her husband had blown up their marriage. She's about 40 years old now, and she's really struggling to get guys even to date her, let alone commit to her. And she's very upset at this. And, well, the brutal truth is, ma'am, you're around 40. Most of the guys who are going to committed long ago. They're taking their wives and kids to church or to baseball practice or whatever. They're living that life. What you're left with are the dregs. And that's a harsh thing to have to realize, but it is true. Um, Look for that marriage earlier if you can. I'm not saying, 17 or 18, but early 20s is a great time to get married if you can manage it, and families should support that, and they should try to make their children more mature. So yeah, get married, have children. That is the life that is fulfilling. That is the vocation most of us are called to, and we should not be putting it off unnecessarily for pointless reasons or often self-destructive reasons.
It's like you mentioned Hollywood earlier. I remember the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and the father, who was being mocked, by the way, by Hollywood when he was saying, "Get married, have babies." But he's right. But the people who wrote the movie obviously trying to make it seem like he's some Neanderthal old Greek guy, all right, and doesn't really know anything about life, when he's the one telling her the truth. Get married, have babies. Sometimes life lessons are real simple. Joe Rossinello, we only have about 2.5 minutes left. Where do you want to go?
Just real quick, I want to end on a positive note. I think, and you mentioned this earlier, Doctor, ultimately, I think there's a vacuum and Christians can fill it. By example, we have to live countercultural. Have families. If we can, have big families. And dedicate ourselves to them. And I believe at the sight of that, people will not only take notice, but inside of them will wish they did it and or promote that to their children. Because what's happening isn't working. It's not working. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think that Christianity provides a better way to live because it is rooted in God's creation order, in the natural law of how we are meant to live. And yes, that's damaged by sin, but we can still do our best by God's grace to follow that, and it will usually prove to be a better way of life. And finally, when there are those difficulties in life, when there are those inevitable sorrows and sufferings, they are not pointless. They can be sanctified, again, through God's grace. They are for a purpose, they are a witness to God's love, and ultimately, love does make us vulnerable. But this vulnerability is something that we see in Christ. God became vulnerable in the person of Christ, incarnate, suffered, died, and was buried for our sake. So the sufferings, the sacrifices that we are sometimes that we have to go through in this life, in our marriages, are just a small participation in that divine suffering that God endured for the sake of bringing many sons to glory, bringing his children back to him. And so that is beautiful. Ultimately, it's about love. It's about sorrow and suffering, even when they happen, being for a glorious future, a glorious love. And it is also just it's a better way to live right now.
And it's a great place to end it, because I was going to say, like, when I think of Christ along the lines of how you just described Jesus is, but we have to remember too that he is the logos, and there is an order to things and sexuality, and that's why we're so happy, Dr. Blake, that you came on the show to talk about the victims of this revolution. It's a revolution against the logos of our sexuality. There is a logos, there is a purpose, there is a meaning. Christ is obviously the logos, to the way we live our lives, and we need to adapt ourselves to that logos, which we know as Christians is Christ. Dr. Blake, where can our audience members find more of your work, your writings, all that fun stuff?
All right, so they can find the book at ignatius.com from the publisher Ignatius Press. They can also find it on Amazon, if that's where they prefer to go. They can find me at eppc.org. That's the Ethics and Public Policy Center. I'm a fellow there. Many great scholars there as well whose work they can look at, but they can find me there, eppc.org.
Dr. Nathaniel Blake has written a new book, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. Please go out, buy the book. Dr. Blake, we could talk to you for hours, and obviously we can't do that today, but we're so grateful that you came on the show. And these are conversations that, hey, look, we're doing our part. Joe and I, obviously, you wrote a book. We're doing our part to be in this battle, to be in this spiritual battle, to be in this culture war, to resist all that we're being assaulted with, both as individuals and as family men. Okay, so we're really appreciative that you came on the show. Needless to say, you're welcome back here anytime. We'd love to have you back, talk about anything.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for having me.
Awesome.
Appreciated
Thank you.
this.
And thank you all out there for joining us at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Download the app and share it with your friends. You'll have access to all of our station's content, not just the front line with Joe and Joe. And Joe and I go live on social media, X, Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube on Thursday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern. All of these interviews from Veritas are posted on our social media also. So if you like what you see, help us out. Like, subscribe, share. Do all that fun stuff. Thanks once again. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.